What if everything you thought you knew about one of the most tragic nights in modern history was incomplete? What if the story you've been told repeatedly in documentaries, newspapers, and interviews only scratches the surface of the truth, or what people still wonder about it? For decades, the death of Princess Diana has haunted the world. It wasn't just a royal tragedy. It became a global phenomenon. Millions watched as a beloved figure left a world she had transformed, leaving questions, grief, and speculation in her wake. And even now, nearly 30 years later, those questions aren't fully answered. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Why do we still talk about it? Why does this story grip the world, generation after generation? It's not just because Diana herself was iconic, but because her story is layered with contradictions, mysteries, and events that feel, to many, too strange to be coincidences. Every detail, every official report, every interview has been dissected, analyzed, and debated. And yet, even with all the attention, there are gaps. There are inconsistencies. And those gaps are precisely where the intrigue lives. In this video, we're diving into the aspects of Diana's death that remain under discussion, the inconsistencies in official reports, and the public reactions that continue to fuel curiosity. We're going to explore why even decades later, every statement, every interview, every memoir is still scrutinized, because people are searching for answers that feel just out of reach. Let's start with the public record. On the night of August 31st, 1997, a car crash in Paris claimed the lives of Princess Diana, Dodi Fayed, and their driver. The world was stunned. Media outlets raced to cover every detail. Some stories emphasized the recklessness of paparazzi. Others noted the car's speed and the driver's alcohol levels. Over time, official investigations concluded that the crash was an accident. But even then, countless questions emerged, questions that have never entirely gone away. For one, the timeline of events that night still contains subtle contradictions. Who was where? Who saw what and when? There are witness accounts that seem to conflict with the official narrative. Some accounts have never been fully explained. Even the paparazzi present that night have recounted their experiences differently in interviews over the years. And it isn't just eyewitness reports. Traffic cameras, emergency response records, hospital logs. Pieces of the puzzle sometimes appear inconsistent or incomplete. And then there's the human factor. The world fell in love with Diana because she was relatable, empathetic, and fearless in her charity work. But the very forces that revered her also seemed to be part of a system determined to maintain control, order, and protocol, even amid chaos. Fans and the public often wonder, how much of what was officially reported was influenced by larger structures? How much was shaped by media narratives, and how much has been lost or intentionally obscured? It's easy to dismiss these as idle speculation. But the ongoing fascination with Diana's death suggests there's more than just curiosity at play. People are drawn to patterns, anomalies, and unanswered questions. They want to make sense of chaos, to understand why events unfolded the way they did. And this desire for understanding is universal. It transcends borders, cultures, and generations. Another layer to consider is the human behavior surrounding grief and loss. In any tragedy, emotions run high. Statements are misremembered. Memories shift. Documents are interpreted in different ways. Add to this the global scrutiny that followed Diana's death, and it becomes easy to see why discrepancies, ambiguities, and unexplained elements exist. It isn't necessarily evidence of malfeasance, but it is evidence of human complexity in the face of crisis. But complexity breeds speculation. And in the case of Diana, the speculation has been relentless. For decades, documentaries, books, and news reports have explored theories about how events unfolded. Some focus on the role of paparazzi, others on security protocols, and others on public reactions. Each theory raises new questions. Each theory adds intrigue. And when you look at the patterns, the gaps, the emotional reactions, and the ongoing debate, it becomes clear why this story remains one of the most analyzed tragedies of modern times. Consider this. Even small details can reignite discussion. A comment in a memoir, a passing remark in a documentary, a long-forgotten interview resurfacing online. All of these have the power to provoke a renewed wave of curiosity. Public fascination with Diana's life and death isn't static. It evolves. It grows. And as new generations discover her story, the intrigue continues to thrive. It isn't just about mystery for mystery's sake. It's about understanding the human story. Diana's life and death exemplify universal themes: love, loss, public scrutiny, fame, vulnerability, and the consequences of living life in the public eye. These themes make her story resonate globally, and they make questions about her death feel personal to many people. Even now, when experts weigh in, journalists analyze the facts, and historians compile detailed reports, there are still people who feel unsettled. The narrative doesn't fully satisfy everyone. There are contradictions to parse, unclear motivations, and moments that seem unexplained. That tension between what we know and what we want to understand is the heartbeat of the ongoing fascination. So why are we revisiting this story today? Because in every mystery, new eyes bring new insights. Archived interviews, previously overlooked details, and public curiosity all converge to create an opportunity to explore what is known and to highlight what remains unresolved. This isn't about declaring guilt or pointing fingers. It's about examining the public record, the inconsistencies, and the ongoing fascination with a tragedy that changed the world. And there's another dimension: the emotional impact. Diana's passing left a global void. Fans around the world mourned, shared stories, and sought meaning. Those reactions are just as much a part of the story as any official report. The human response, grief, fascination, obsession, is a lens through which this story is still being interpreted. How did people process it? How did institutions respond? How did the media shape the public's understanding? These questions provide a dramatic, emotional core for any investigation into the ongoing intrigue. As we dig deeper, we'll explore contradictions in reports, revisit witness statements, examine media coverage, and track the evolution of public theories. We'll also explore how the monarchy's own protocols, statements, and responses contributed to uncertainty. Along the way, you'll see why some questions have lingered for decades and why curiosity about Diana's death remains so intense. And as we begin, ask yourself, what makes a story continue to grip the world long after the events themselves have passed? Is it the mystery, the unanswered questions, the emotional resonance? Or is it something deeper, a reflection of the human desire to find truth in a chaotic world? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when a single sentence changes the way people think about history? One phrase, uttered quietly in a room full of insiders, can ripple through the decades, altering perceptions, reigniting questions, and sending shockwaves through an entire institution. This is exactly what happened when a comment made by Princess and remembered by those who were present as unusual, cryptic, and unusually pointed, resurfaced in public memory decades later. And while it didn't make the headlines at the time, today it's a detail that has analysts, historians, and royal watchers revisiting old footage, interviews, and memoirs to understand its full weight. To understand why this comment was so striking, we have to first understand the environment in which it was made. Princess Anne has long been known for her bluntness, her meticulous attention to detail, and her tendency to speak her mind, even when the consequences are uncomfortable. Unlike some members of the royal family, she doesn't shy away from confrontation, and she has always been fiercely protective of both her family and the institution she represents. But her blunt honesty is paired with discretion. She rarely speaks publicly about sensitive matters. And so, when she did make a statement, even in a private setting, it carried unusual weight. The context of the comment is critical. It reportedly occurred during a private gathering of senior royal staff and trusted advisors, a meeting convened to discuss ongoing media scrutiny of the family and the handling of sensitive events from the past. Those present would later describe the atmosphere as tense, heavy with anticipation, and charged with unspoken anxiety. Even within the palace, whispers circulated. Everyone knew that topics from that night in Paris were untouchable. And yet, Anne, reportedly unflinching, chose to speak. The words she used were reportedly so pointed that even seasoned courtiers were caught off guard. It wasn't a scandalous outburst in the traditional sense. It wasn't meant to accuse or condemn. Instead, It was subtle, almost surgical, a phrase that hinted at awareness, insight, and concern that others either could not see or were unwilling to acknowledge. Witnesses later recalled that she spoke in a calm but authoritative tone, something that amplified the gravity of what she was saying. And because it was unusual for her to speak so openly in private, the phrase lingered in the memories of those who heard it. Why did it matter? To outsiders, it may have seemed minor, a fleeting remark in a world of high protocol and ceremony. But in royal circles, nuance is everything. A carefully worded statement can indicate agreement, disagreement, suspicion, or approval. One phrase can expose mismanagement, reveal doubts, or signal the need for caution. Anne's comment did all three, and it did so in a way that was immediately recognized by those present as extraordinary. For decades, this remark existed only in whispered recollections and private accounts. But as interest in the royal family surged, particularly regarding Princess Diana's legacy, it resurfaced in interviews, memoirs, and documentaries. Analysts pounced on it. Social media discussions dissected it, exploring every possible interpretation. And historians began to reconsider the context of other events, the timing, the reports, the protocols, through the lens of that single remark. What had been a footnote in the palace's internal history suddenly became a focal point for public curiosity. So what exactly did the phrase suggest? While the precise wording is debated, its essence implied awareness of events that many considered closed. It suggested insight into inconsistencies, contradictions, or lapses in judgment that were never publicly acknowledged. Those who heard it reportedly felt a mixture of surprise and unease. Surprised that Anne had spoken, uneasy because what she hinted at made them question what they thought they knew. Imagine for a moment being in that room. The weight of the palace around you, the history, the expectations, the global gaze. Even if no one outside knows what's being said, the impact is immediate. It's not just a comment. It's a signal. And signals in that world are everything. One slip could cause panic. One revelation could force a reevaluation of decades of decisions. And Anne, with her characteristic precision, knew exactly how much to reveal and how much to leave unsaid. This moment is also important because it shows the human side of history. We often think of historical events as fixed, documented, and unchangeable. But the reality is that people, emotions, and interpretations shape everything. A statement that seemed small at the time can become monumental when looked at through the lens of hindsight. Anne's comment is a perfect example. At first, it may have seemed like a minor observation, a passing thought in a tense meeting. But over time, it has grown into a symbol of insight, of unanswered questions, and of the ongoing fascination with events that remain, in part, unresolved. What's particularly intriguing is how this comment intersects with the public's understanding of Princess Diana's life and death. Even without making accusations or presenting unverified claims, the comment invites reconsideration of timelines, decisions, and reactions. It provokes questions like, how closely were senior royals monitoring the situation? What did they notice and not notice? What conversations occurred behind closed doors that the public will never see? These are not idle speculations. They are questions grounded in human curiosity and a desire to understand complex events. And then there's the ripple effect. Once the comment was revisited in public discourse, it changed how people interpreted other statements, interviews, and documented actions. Scholars and analysts began cross-referencing accounts. Journalists combed through archives. Social media communities debated every nuance. Suddenly, a single phrase from a private meeting decades ago had reignited global interest. But there's more to it. The intrigue isn't just about what was said. It's about why it was said, to whom, and under what circumstances. And that's where the drama lies. Because even in a structured, disciplined institution like the monarchy, emotions, loyalties, and personal perspectives matter. They influence decisions, shape interpretations, and create consequences, sometimes immediate, sometimes unfolding over years. Anne's comment was more than words. It was a window into these dynamics, offering a glimpse of how decisions are processed, how information is evaluated, and how history is remembered, both publicly and privately. The public's fascination with this moment also highlights the tension between transparency and discretion. Royal life is famously controlled, curated, and guarded. Every public statement is calculated, every appearance orchestrated. But private remarks, the ones made in meetings, off-the-record conversations, or whispered observations, can reveal a very different story. They show how people navigate truth, secrecy, loyalty, and the pressures of their roles. And when one of those remarks escapes into public memory, even decades later, it can dramatically shift how we view events. Think about that. A single remark, once private, can change public perception decades later. That's why history is never truly fixed. That's why curiosity persists. That's why the world continues to be captivated by Diana's life, her legacy, and the complex, often opaque institutions surrounding her. And the most compelling part? Those who were in the room that day remained silent about many details. We only know fragments, passed along through memoirs, interviews, and careful recollections. The mystery of what exactly and was alluding to, the layers behind her words, and the context in which she spoke. These are things we may never fully know. And that uncertainty is exactly what keeps people coming back, re-examining old footage, reading archived documents, and questioning long-established narratives. It's a powerful reminder that history is not just what happened. It's how we interpret it. It's how we remember it. And sometimes, it's how the smallest words, spoken quietly, can resonate louder than any headline or public statement ever could. So as we move deeper into this story, keep one question in mind. What did Princess N.C. understand or suspect that made her speak in a way that was unusual, pointed, and memorable? What was the context that made her remarks so striking? And how does that single moment illuminate a world of complexity, secrecy, and unanswered questions that still fascinate the public today? Because what came next, the way that comment reverberated through royal circles and public discourse, would set the stage for decades of speculation, analysis, and intrigue. And it all starts with that one phrase that shocked the palace. When we think of the British royal family, public image often overshadows personal reality. Headlines, photos, and interviews give one impression, while the private lives of family members, their alliances, disagreements, and confidences, remain hidden behind palace walls. And in the case of Princess and Princess Diana, the public image of their relationship was one thing. The private truth, it seems, was something entirely different. From the moment Diana entered the royal family, she was under immense pressure, suddenly thrust into a world of centuries-old traditions, constant media scrutiny, and rigid expectations. She had to navigate a labyrinth of rules while trying to maintain her individuality. It was a lonely place, and yet she found moments of connection with people who understood the weight of royal life. One of those connections, it turns out, may have been with Princess Anne. At first glance, Anne and Diana appeared to be very different personalities. And the Princess Royal is often described as disciplined, practical, and unflinchingly blunt. Diana, on the other hand, was warm, empathetic, and media-savvy, with a charm that captivated the public but sometimes perplexed palace insiders. Observers initially saw this as a clash of personalities. How could two women with such contrasting approaches to royalty ever form a genuine bond? But contrasts often create balance. Sources close to the family have suggested that and admired Diana's courage, her willingness to engage with the public, and her emotional openness, qualities in herself sometimes struggled to express. Diana, in turn, may have appreciated Anne's steadiness, her clarity, and her pragmatic approach to navigating palace politics. In many ways, they were mirrors of each other, each providing what the other lacked, each offering a stabilizing presence in the whirlwind of royal life. There were reported private interactions that hinted at a unique bond. According to memoirs and interviews, there were moments of shared humor, discreet support during difficult family gatherings, and subtle signals of respect and understanding. While these interactions rarely reached the public eye, they shaped how both women approached the intense pressures of their roles. Observers who later pieced together these interactions noticed that when Anne spoke about Diana, even in general terms, her tone carried a mixture of admiration, concern, and sometimes frustration, not unusual for someone deeply invested in the well-being of a family member navigating such high stakes. But this relationship also had its tensions. Palace life is layered with hierarchy, protocol, and history, and Diana's rapid rise in popularity sometimes created friction. And, trained from an early age to understand institutional expectations, may have noticed risks and potential consequences that Diana herself could not fully anticipate. Reports suggest that there were moments when Anne quietly questioned Diana's decisions or offered guidance behind the scenes. Subtle, discreet interventions meant to steer events without public scrutiny. Consider, for example, moments where Diana's schedule, her public engagements, or her charitable work intersected with high-profile royal events. Anne's influence, while rarely overt, may have shaped how Diana navigated these intersections. Observers have noted that the Princess Royal's perspective often provided a grounding force, someone who could offer clarity in moments of confusion, someone who understood the long-term implications of decisions within a historically cautious institution. And yet, despite the subtle influence, there was also a profound emotional layer, and reportedly empathized deeply with Diana's challenges. The relentless public gaze, the pressures of marriage, and the intense scrutiny of personal choices. Unlike some members of the royal family who maintained strict detachment and seemed to recognize the human side of Diana's struggles, this awareness may have fueled the pointed comment she made in that private meeting. The remark that shocked her colleagues and later resurfaced as a symbol of insight and awareness. We also cannot overlook the emotional dimension of shared experiences. Both women experienced grief, stress, and the constant balancing act of public duty versus private life. These commonalities created an unspoken understanding, a bond that may not have required frequent conversation to be meaningful. Even in moments of disagreement, there was likely a foundation of trust, a recognition that, despite different approaches, both were navigating the same complex world. The significance of their relationship becomes even clearer when examining the public narratives. Media portrayals often cast Anne and Diana as distant or even antagonistic, emphasizing the contrast in personality and approach to duty. Yet, behind the scenes, the reality appears more nuanced. Respect, quiet support, and occasional friction seem to have coexisted, creating a dynamic that, while private, had ripple effects on how events unfolded. This hidden relationship is particularly important in the context of speculation about events surrounding Diana's death. While no accusations or allegations are being made, understanding the dynamics between Anne and Diana provides a lens through which we can interpret decisions, reactions, and the emotional undercurrents of that period. It helps explain why certain private remarks, like Anne's cryptic comment, carried so much weight. People who knew Diana intimately, who understood her personality and the pressure she faced, would notice details others might overlook. Imagine being in a room where history, protocol, and human emotion collide. Anne's experience, her perspective, and her awareness of the challenges Diana faced could inform her observations in ways that seem subtle to outsiders but are deeply meaningful to those who understand the stakes. In that context, even a seemingly small remark becomes layered with significance, a signal, a reflection, a clue to broader truths about the pressures within the palace. It's also worth noting the cultural and emotional resonance of their relationship. For the public, Diana embodied warmth, relatability, and empathy, and, more reserved, represented discipline, clarity, and the enduring weight of tradition. Their interactions, sometimes collaborative, sometimes corrective, sometimes empathetic, show how the personal and institutional intersect. And in the shadow of tragedy, these intersections take on an even greater importance. They shape understanding, influence narratives, and contribute to the ongoing fascination with the events of that period. What makes this relationship particularly compelling is the tension between what was visible and what remained hidden. Public perception focused on differences, sometimes creating a narrative of distance or rivalry. Behind closed doors, however, there was depth, complexity, and mutual awareness. The public rarely saw the quiet conversations, the shared insights, or the subtle interventions, but these moments mattered. They help explain why certain decisions were made, why certain precautions were taken, and why certain questions remain unresolved decades later. And this brings us back to Anne's comment, the one that shocked palace insiders. Its significance is amplified when we understand the bond she had with Diana. She wasn't just observing events from the sidelines. She had insight into Diana's experiences, her pressures, and her vulnerabilities. She had context that others in the room might have lacked. And that context is what gives her remark such resonance. It wasn't a random observation. It was informed by years of nuanced understanding of a complex, high-pressure environment. For those following the story, this means that every remark, every recollection, and every observation carries layers. Understanding the personal dynamics, the respect, the empathy, the occasional tension, adds depth to the narrative. It shows that historical events are not just a series of dates and reports. They are shaped by human relationships, personal insight, and the quiet moments that never make it into public records. As we continue to explore the events surrounding Diana's death and the ongoing curiosity about what really happened, keep this relationship in mind. It is a key to understanding why certain private comments are significant, why some observations have been revisited, and why the public continues to dissect every nuance decades later. Anne's understanding of Diana was not just emotional. It was informed, perceptive, and grounded in lived experience within the royal institution. That combination makes her perspective unique, and it helps explain why even a seemingly small remark can take on enormous significance. And as we move forward, one question lingers. How did this relationship influence what was said, what was observed, and what was remembered? What insights did and gained from her closeness to Diana? And how did those insights shape her private reflections in later years? Because what comes next, the exploration of the night everything changed, is where these dynamics intersect with the events that captivated the world, creating the mysteries and unanswered questions that still persist today. But what came next would unravel timelines, challenge assumptions, and reveal details that few had considered, and it all starts with the night everyone thought they understood. History has a way of freezing moments in time, but reality is rarely neat. Events that the world remembers in broad strokes often hide a complex web of timing, decisions, and human behavior. The night Princess Diana died is remembered globally as a single, tragic event. Yet, beneath the headlines and official reports lies a night full of contradictions, unexpected turns, and unanswered questions that have fueled curiosity for decades. Understanding this night in detail is crucial to understanding why private comments, like those attributed to Princess Anne, carry such weight and continue to intrigue the public. The night in question began like many others, ordinary in routine but extraordinary in the forces at play behind the scenes. Diana had been in Paris, enjoying time with close friends and family, while simultaneously managing the intense public interest that had become a constant in her life. Every move was observed, every photograph scrutinized, every decision dissected. This environment, where personal moments collided with public expectation, created a pressure cooker that few outside could imagine. What made the night so critical was not just the tragic outcome, but the decisions and movements that preceded it. Observers have noted that a series of small, seemingly mundane choices contributed to a chain of events that escalated rapidly. From the timing of departures to the coordination of security, each factor played a role in shaping the night's outcome. Analysts who have revisited the public record note that even minor discrepancies, a delayed meeting here, a miscommunication there, can alter the course of events in ways no one could anticipate. The paparazzi's presence, already a constant shadow in Diana's life, intensified the sense of urgency. Media attention was unrelenting, with photographers positioned strategically, waiting for every opportunity to capture a moment that could become iconic. The presence of cameras, flashes, and anticipation added pressure to the movements of those involved. Security protocols, designed to protect, were also influenced by these external pressures. Observers have suggested that the interplay between protection measures and media intrusion created an environment where risk increased exponentially, even if no one intended harm. Timing is everything, and on this night, timing became a central element of confusion. Witness statements, emergency response records, and media coverage provide a timeline that has been analyzed exhaustively. Yet contradictions persist. Some accounts describe immediate responses. Others suggest delays or miscommunication. Even the sequence of movements prior to departure has inconsistencies, leaving researchers and enthusiasts puzzling over small but potentially significant details. How do these inconsistencies arise? Human memory, stress, and perception all play roles. But the result is a timeline that feels simultaneously familiar and elusive, a narrative everyone thinks they know but few fully understand. Security decisions that evening were especially scrutinized in later analyses. Who was present, who followed protocols, and who deviated? Some reports suggest that procedures were altered or adjusted, intentionally or unintentionally. The presence of unfamiliar staff, rapid changes in route, or deviations from expected security patterns all add layers of complexity. Each decision, each movement, becomes a focal point for questions that remain unresolved. And then there is the human element, the emotional weight carried by those involved. The night was filled with stress, urgency, and heightened emotion. Decisions were made under pressure, with information incomplete and circumstances evolving rapidly. Observers emphasize that these human factors, fatigue, concern, distraction, and emotional response, are critical to understanding why events unfolded the way they did. It is not merely a mechanical sequence of actions. It is a tapestry woven from human judgment, perception, and behavior under duress. Even within the palace, the night was a focal point for reflection, analysis, and, in some cases, confusion. Those close to Diana reportedly struggled to reconcile what they knew with what was reported. Decisions that may have seemed routine at the time were later revisited, often with surprise or concern. And for individuals like Princess Anne, who had both personal insight and institutional awareness, the night represented more than a tragic headline. It was a sequence of events laden with nuance, gaps, and unanswered questions. The public, of course, experienced this night differently. News broke quickly, images circulated globally, and narratives solidified almost immediately. Yet, even as millions mourned, debates began. How could such a tragedy occur? Were all factors accounted for? Did anyone see warning signs? These questions, some raised instinctively and others rigorously analyzed, have persisted for decades. And they are the questions that make Private Insights, like Anne's comments, so compelling. She had a perspective shaped by observation, understanding, and the unique position of seeing both the personal and institutional dimensions of events. Consider also the emotional resonance of this night. Beyond logistics, protocols, and media scrutiny, there was grief, confusion, and human fragility. Those present, staff, security, friends, and family, were confronted with sudden, traumatic circumstances. Human reactions under pressure are unpredictable. Memory is selective. Interpretations vary. And yet, despite these challenges, patterns, observations, and anomalies can be traced, providing a framework to explore what truly happened and why certain questions remain open. What adds intrigue is the combination of chaos and structure. On one hand, there were emergency protocols, scheduled routes, and protective measures. On the other, there was spontaneity, decision-making under pressure, and rapid adaptation. The collision of these elements created circumstances where small actions could have disproportionately large effects. Every movement, every decision, every miscommunication became magnified in retrospect. This brings us to the contradictions. Analysts have highlighted inconsistencies in timelines, discrepancies in witness reports, and variations in official statements. Even minor variations, whether in the reported speed of a vehicle, the timing of an emergency response, or the location of key individuals, fuel ongoing questions. These discrepancies do not necessarily suggest wrongdoing, but they highlight how complex, fast-moving events can produce gaps between perception and reality. And when high-profile figures are involved, every gap is scrutinized relentlessly. At the heart of this analysis is the recognition that human behavior under stress is inherently variable. Decisions made in real time, with incomplete information, often diverge from ideal protocols. Observers note that understanding these human factors, fatigue, urgency, stress, emotion, is essential to interpreting the sequence of events. This perspective frames why private commentary, like Anne's, is so significant. Her observations were informed not just by data or protocol, but by experience, judgment, and a keen awareness of both human behavior and institutional expectations. And finally, we must acknowledge the broader cultural and social context. The world was watching, grieving, and dissecting every detail. The media, public, and royal institution were all interacting in a high-pressure environment that magnified every anomaly, contradiction, and unusual decision. This context makes the night even more fascinating to study. It is not merely a sequence of events, but a collision of human emotion, institutional behavior, media scrutiny, and public fascination. As we look back, the night seems simultaneously familiar and mysterious. We know what happened in broad strokes. We know the tragic outcome. But the details, the decisions, the movements, the human reactions, the contradictions, create a tapestry that invites scrutiny, speculation, and analysis. And within that tapestry, private observations like Princess Anne's become crucial. They provide a lens through which to understand not only what occurred, but why the world continues to question it decades later. The night everything changed is more than a historical moment. It is a reminder of human complexity, of institutional pressure, and of the interplay between public perception and private reality. It shows how moments of high stress can produce outcomes that reverberate far beyond their immediate context. And it sets the stage for deeper questions. What was observed? What was understood? And what remained unsaid, until later interpretations brought them back into focus. Because what comes next? The moments inside the royal crisis rooms, the conversations that were never publicized, and the subtleties of reaction and responsibility will challenge assumptions, highlight contradictions, and reveal why some questions remain unanswered, even decades later. And it all begins with a night that everyone thought they understood, but that few ever truly did. When tragedy strikes a family under the global spotlight, what happens behind closed doors is as critical, if not more so, than what the world sees on television. For the royal family, the night Princess Diana's life ended was not only a personal catastrophe, it was a logistical and public relations crisis of unprecedented scale. Behind the palace walls, a complex web of decisions, reactions, and emotions unfolded. Decisions that were influenced by protocol, pressure, human instinct, and the awareness that every move would be scrutinized worldwide. Imagine the scene. A suite of rooms, lights dimmed, telephones ringing incessantly, courtiers and aides moving between offices, delivering updates, and fielding calls from advisors, security officials, and government liaisons. Every conversation mattered. Every decision was weighed not just for immediate effect, but for long-term implications on public perception, media narratives, and internal family relations. The stakes could not have been higher. Inside that crisis room, emotions ran high. It wasn't just about strategy, it was about grief, shock, and confusion. Some members of staff had been close to Diana for years, while others were tasked with managing logistical and media responses. The room was a crucible of stress, where calm professionalism collided with raw emotion. Observers later noted that even the most experienced courtiers were visibly affected, making judgment and memory vulnerable to the intense pressure. And yet, amidst this tension, precision was expected. The royal family operates within a structure that prioritizes procedure and hierarchy. Decisions about communications, timing, and appearances are rarely made spontaneously. Instructions flow through chains of command. Public statements are reviewed carefully. But on a night like this, the usual rules are tested. Crises force improvisation. Judgment calls must be made quickly, sometimes without complete information. And the consequences are magnified, both internally and in the court of public opinion. This is where private insight becomes critical. Princess Anne, with her understanding of both protocol and human behavior, reportedly played a pivotal role in observing what was happening. She was aware not just of the formal processes, but of the subtle interpersonal dynamics unfolding in real time. Reports from memoirs and interviews suggest that she noticed inconsistencies, lapses, and subtle shifts in demeanor that others may have overlooked. In a crisis room, such observations can influence decisions, quietly, discreetly, and without fanfare. Consider the communications challenges. News of Diana's accident spread quickly, and the palace faced an immediate dilemma: how to manage the information publicly while handling the emotional impact privately. Advisors were tasked with drafting statements, coordinating with hospitals, and ensuring that any public messaging reflected dignity, empathy, and control. Every word mattered, and every misstep could fuel speculation, panic, or international criticism. Security was another immediate concern. Ensuring the safety of other family members, controlling access to the hospital, and managing potential media intrusion became priorities. Reports suggest that security teams were operating under extreme pressure, balancing protection, communication, and rapid assessment of risks. In moments like these, small miscommunications or unanticipated decisions can have outsized consequences, and observers have noted several anomalies in how security protocols were applied that night. Within the room, there were also emotional undercurrents that affected decision-making. Grief is not linear. It's unpredictable, and it affects behavior in subtle ways. Courtiers, aides, and family members were all navigating shock and worry, which may have influenced how information was interpreted or acted upon. This human factor, often overlooked in official reports, is a key lens for understanding why events may have diverged from idealized procedures. Media liaison posed another critical challenge. The palace had to coordinate responses to journalists, photographers, and broadcasters, many of whom were already speculating wildly. Every press briefing, every statement, had to be carefully calibrated to maintain dignity while providing enough information to satisfy public curiosity. Behind closed doors, debates likely occurred over timing, tone, and content. Debates in which Princess Anne's perspective, shaped by years of royal experience, may have been influential. Even mundane decisions took on extraordinary weight, from how staff coordinated transport to the hospital, to how information was relayed to family members, to how and when security moved personnel. All of these choices were magnified by the context of the tragedy. Each action could be second-guessed, analyzed, or misinterpreted by the public and the press. The intensity of this scrutiny added pressure that is difficult to fully appreciate unless one has been inside a crisis of this scale. Observers have also highlighted moments of tension in the room. Differences in opinion emerged, not necessarily in conflict, but in approach. Some prioritized rapid communication to the public. Others focused on ensuring privacy and dignity for the family. And in the midst of these debates, subtle signals, observations, and private comments, including Anne's, became crucial reference points for understanding what was happening and what steps to take next. The emotional stakes were deeply personal. Everyone in that room understood that the outcome of the night would have profound implications for family, public perception, and the historical record. Decisions made under such circumstances are rarely clear-cut. They involve a delicate balance of empathy, strategy, and instinct. And when hindsight is applied, those decisions are often dissected, scrutinized, and sometimes criticized, even decades later. One critical aspect of the crisis room dynamics was the role of memory and documentation. Notes were taken, logs were maintained, and updates were delivered verbally and in writing. Yet human memory is fallible, especially under stress. Differences in perception, selective recall, and emotional response all contribute to inconsistencies in later accounts. Analysts and historians who study these records must contend with the fact that even official logs may not perfectly reflect reality, making private insight all the more valuable. And here's where the intrigue deepens. The public rarely sees these moments. The world sees statements, press conferences, and media coverage. What happens behind the palace doors is hidden, interpreted only through selective leaks, memoirs, and interviews. Every observation that escapes this secrecy is amplified, because it offers a glimpse into the mechanics of a world most people can only imagine. Private comments, subtle gestures, and quiet decisions take on outsized significance because they are rare and often revealing. For decades, researchers, journalists, and the public have returned repeatedly to this crisis room scenario. They analyze timelines, scrutinize decisions, and attempt to reconstruct the night in a way that reconciles public perception with private reality. The presence of people like Princess Anne, experienced, observant, and attuned to both protocol and emotion, adds a crucial layer to this reconstruction. Her perspective bridges the gap between institutional procedure and personal understanding, providing context that is otherwise absent from the public record. This chapter, then, is about understanding the environment in which decisions were made, information was processed, and emotions ran high. It is about the complexity of crisis management under global scrutiny. And it is about the subtle insights that can emerge when someone with experience, perspective, and awareness observes events unfold. Insights that may not be fully visible to outsiders, but are nonetheless critical to understanding how the night was navigated. Because what comes next, the decisions, the reactions, and the moments that shaped the public narrative, will show why some questions remain unanswered, why speculation persists, and why the world continues to be fascinated by events that took place behind palace walls. And as we move forward, one question looms. How did the actions taken inside this room ripple outward, influencing the world's perception, the family's grief, and the enduring mysteries surrounding the night that changed everything? Because what happened next? The unfolding of information, the reactions, and the subtle choices of those inside would set the stage for decades of analysis, curiosity, and intrigue that is still alive today. The night Princess Diana died did not just shock the royal family, it shocked the world. But the way the news spread, the intensity of media coverage, and the relentless public scrutiny reveal a story just as compelling as the tragedy itself. Understanding how the world learned about Diana's accident and how the media frenzy unfolded is crucial to understanding the pressure points, the contradictions, and the controversies that continue to haunt this story decades later. When the initial reports surfaced, the news traveled at lightning speed. Even in an era before social media dominance, journalists and broadcasters had the means to transmit information almost instantaneously. Headlines were crafted, video footage was edited, and images of the scene began circulating globally within hours. The world went from casual curiosity about Diana's life to a state of collective shock in an instant. But the information that reached the public was fragmentary and inconsistent. Initial reports contained conflicting details. The location of the accident, the extent of injuries, and the timing of events all varied between sources. Some outlets claimed that Diana was already deceased at the scene, while others reported she was being rushed to a hospital. Even seemingly minor discrepancies, a vehicle description, the number of passengers, or the presence of security, fueled speculation and uncertainty. For the media, this chaos was both a challenge and an opportunity. Journalists scrambled to confirm facts, while editors debated how much information to release to the public. Press offices issued statements, sometimes contradictory, sometimes delayed, as officials tried to balance transparency with sensitivity. But the result was a feeding frenzy. Every outlet, every camera, every reporter was trying to capture the story before their competitors. The paparazzi played a controversial role that night. Their relentless pursuit of images, driven by demand from newspapers and magazines, created ethical dilemmas and heightened the sense of intrusion. Observers have debated whether the presence of photographers influenced events leading up to and during the accident. Regardless of direct causation, the intensity of their presence contributed to the public perception that Diana's life was constantly under siege, a narrative reinforced immediately after the tragedy. Meanwhile, television broadcasts looped images of ambulances, hospital entrances, and grieving family members. Anchors spoke in urgent tones, interviews with witnesses were broadcast, and rumors spread faster than verified facts. The combination of urgency, spectacle, and emotional impact ensured that the story dominated global news cycles, making it impossible for the public to look away. The palace faced an unprecedented challenge in this environment. Every statement, every action, was scrutinized by millions. Advisors had to craft responses that were both accurate and empathetic, knowing that any misstep could inflame speculation or criticism. Behind the scenes, courtiers and family members were in constant communication with press officers, reconciling incoming information with public messaging. The tension between rapid dissemination and accuracy created a delicate balancing act, one fraught with pressure, human error, and ethical dilemmas. In this maelstrom, private insight became invaluable. Observers have suggested that Princess Anne, with her awareness of both protocol and media dynamics, was uniquely positioned to provide perspective. She understood how a statement, gesture, or delay could be interpreted in multiple ways by journalists, public relations teams, and the global audience. Her input, though largely behind the scenes, may have influenced the tone and content of official communications, helping navigate a labyrinth of potential misinterpretation. Another dimension of the media frenzy was the emotional tone. The public's response was not merely informational, it was visceral. Millions mourned, cried, and expressed grief collectively. Letters, calls, and public vigils began almost immediately, reflecting a global connection to Diana's life and death. This intensity amplified the pressure on the royal family and advisors, as public emotion demanded responsiveness and visibility, yet also required sensitivity and restraint. Discrepancies in reporting also fueled conspiracy theories and speculation. When different outlets presented contradictory information, or when timelines seemed inconsistent, questions arose about what had really happened. Why did some reports indicate immediate emergency response while others suggested delays? Why were some security measures highlighted while others were downplayed? Analysts and the public alike began scrutinizing every detail, comparing reports, and creating narratives that filled in perceived gaps. It is here that the private insights of insiders like and become particularly intriguing. Those with first-hand knowledge of events could observe the discrepancies between official action and public perception. A remark, a glance, or a subtle decision could reveal awareness of something unreported, misunderstood, or deliberately left unsaid. This is why statements attributed to, and even cryptic ones, carry such fascination. They may hint at the deeper truths beneath the public spectacle. The media frenzy also had a temporal dimension. The first hours were chaotic, but even days later, the story evolved as new details emerged. Hospital statements, eyewitness accounts, and family communications created a narrative that shifted almost daily. Each shift prompted renewed analysis, speculation, and coverage, ensuring that the public's attention remained fixed on the story. Social and cultural commentary, international reactions, and celebrity opinions further intensified the discussion, making Diana's death not just a royal tragedy, but a global cultural event. And then there's the psychological dimension, how constant scrutiny affects decision-making. Those inside the palace, tasked with responding to the media, were operating under extreme pressure. The need to appear composed, empathetic, and in control conflicted with the reality of grief, shock, and urgency. These internal pressures inevitably shaped the timing, content, and tone of statements, factors that fueled further public speculation and scrutiny. This chapter also highlights the interplay between fact and perception. The media presents information in a way that can blur the line between what happened and how it is experienced. Images, headlines, and interviews all contribute to collective understanding or misunderstanding. The frenzy, then, becomes both a narrative and a lens through which history is remembered, influencing not only public memory, but also official responses and institutional behavior. Understanding the media frenzy also helps contextualize later events, including private reflections and statements. When Princess Anne made her cryptic comment, she was operating in a context shaped by public scrutiny, institutional pressure, and personal insight into the family's experience. Her awareness of how information spreads, how perception diverges from reality, and how miscommunication can escalate, makes her observations far more meaningful than they may appear on the surface. So the media frenzy is not just about headlines and coverage. It is about the collision of grief, scrutiny, human behavior, and institutional response. It is about the way public perception magnifies every action, every statement, every decision, and how insiders, armed with experience and insight, interpret and navigate that complex environment. And as the world reeled from what it was seeing, private insights began to emerge, leaking slowly through memoirs, interviews, and anonymous accounts. These fragments created tension between the public narrative and the private truth, tension that continues to captivate historians, journalists, and royal watchers. The media frenzy of that night, therefore, is more than a historical footnote. It is a lens into human behavior, institutional pressures, and the interplay between private knowledge and public perception. And it sets the stage for understanding why some remarks, like Anne's, resonate decades later. Because what came next? The internal assessments, the whispered observations, and the subtle analysis of events would lay the foundation for decades of intrigue, speculation, and unanswered questions that the world still debates today. In any crisis, security is meant to be the backbone, the shield that protects, manages risk, and ensures that those in danger are supported and safeguarded. But when the tragic night of Princess Diana's death is examined closely, questions about security decisions, oversights, and anomalies emerge with a frequency that cannot be ignored. Understanding these elements is essential to grasp why private insights, like those attributed to Princess Anne, carry such weight, and why the narrative surrounding Diana's death remains fraught with controversy decades later. Security measures on that night were multi-layered, involving both private and public actors. From palace security teams to personal bodyguards and law enforcement liaisons, multiple layers of oversight were in place, or at least theoretically. Yet, as later investigations revealed, these layers were sometimes misaligned, overextended, or compromised by human error. Timing, coordination, and communication were critical, but under the stress of the evening, even small deviations had profound consequences. Consider the route taken by Diana and her companions. Security plans are designed to anticipate risks, including traffic patterns, potential interference, and media presence. However, reports suggest that the chosen route included factors that increased exposure, factors that may have been known but underestimated. Observers point to the proximity of paparazzi, the speed of travel, and the choices made in real time by drivers and security personnel. Each decision may have seemed logical in isolation, but together, they created a vulnerability that would prove catastrophic. Critics of the security arrangements argue that certain lapses were avoidable. Reports indicate that coordination between different security teams was inconsistent, and lines of communication were strained. In a high-pressure situation, even minor misalignments can escalate rapidly. For example, if a security team assumes another is covering a particular risk, while the second team believes it is the responsibility of the first, the result can be dangerous gaps. Analysts have highlighted these overlaps and gaps as critical elements in understanding how events unfolded. The role of personal bodyguards is particularly intriguing. These professionals are trained for immediate decision-making under stress, yet even they faced extraordinary challenges that night. Conflicting reports exist regarding positioning, reaction time, and intervention strategies. While some witnesses suggest that the bodyguards acted appropriately given the circumstances, others point to missed opportunities, unclear communication, or moments where protocol may not have been followed strictly. Adding complexity is the presence of external factors. Paparazzi, bystanders, and emergency responders, all interacting with the security framework. These actors, while unintentional in their influence, contributed to the unpredictable dynamics of the situation. Every movement, flash of a camera, or attempt to intervene created ripple effects that affected how security teams could respond. The result was an environment where even the most disciplined protocols could be compromised, magnifying the risk for those involved. Investigations conducted after the tragedy have provided partial clarity, but also fueled continued controversy. Some reports focus on procedural deviations, highlighting areas where standard operating procedures were not followed. Others emphasize human factors, stress, fatigue, and rapid decision-making under extreme pressure. Both perspectives are important, but together they reveal a tension between theory and practice. Between the expectations of security and the realities of a chaotic, emotionally charged environment. This is where private insights, such as those attributed to Princess Anne, become particularly compelling. Someone with Anne's experience understands not only the rules and procedures, but also the human behavior and institutional dynamics that influence security decisions. Observations she may have made, even in passing, carry significance because they provide context that is often missing from public reports. The judgment calls, the emotional pressures, the subtle misalignments, and the awareness of what could go wrong in real time. It is also important to note the broader institutional implications. Security oversight does not operate in isolation. It is embedded within a network of hierarchy, protocol, and accountability. Decisions are influenced not only by immediate threat assessment, but also by consideration of institutional reputation, public perception, and legal liability. These pressures can conflict with operational priorities, sometimes creating compromises that, in hindsight, seem questionable or inadequate. Questions about security oversight are compounded by the rapid evolution of media coverage. Photographs, video, and real-time reporting added immense pressure on security teams to act visibly, maintain control, and protect privacy simultaneously. This dual expectation, to safeguard and to be seen safeguarding, introduced an additional layer of complexity. Analysts have argued that this interplay between performance and protection may have contributed to decisions that inadvertently increased risk. Moreover, human error cannot be underestimated. Stress, fatigue, and high stakes contribute to lapses in judgment, even among highly trained personnel. Memory distortion under duress can affect how actions are reported, analyzed, and understood. When these human factors intersect with complex procedures, unpredictable environmental variables, and the public eye, the margin for error shrinks dramatically. The controversy surrounding security oversight also includes debates about the adequacy of preparation. Were risk assessments thorough enough? Were alternative routes and contingency plans sufficient? Did communication channels function effectively under pressure? Analysts continue to examine these questions, noting that small deviations from ideal practice may have had disproportionate consequences. And then there is the human dimension of accountability. Security personnel operate under extreme pressure, often with limited information and conflicting priorities. Assigning blame in such scenarios is complex, especially when decisions are made in real time and outcomes are influenced by factors beyond anyone's control.